A Mesopotamian baker's hands never left the dough, not because of devotion, but because the law demanded it. 2100 BCE. A clay tablet surfaces in the ruins of Nippur. On it, a list of regulations for bakers, not suggestions, rules carved in stone, enforced by the city's administrators. Violation meant a fine or worse. The specificity is what catches the eye. Regulations about dough weight, flour quality, the exact dimensions of the oven. This wasn't about perfection. This was about control. Bread was not a luxury in Babylon. It was currency. It was survival. For 90% of the population, bread wasn't a side dish. It was the meal. A laborer received his wage partly in grain, partly in actual bread loaves. A family's wealth was measured in how much grain they could store. And that made bakers the gatekeepers of civilization itself. The staple grain was barley, not wheat. Barley grows in harsh soil. Wheat demands better land, and Mesopotamia's land was unpredictable. Too much water from the Tigris and Euphrates, and crops rotted. Too little, and nothing grew. Barley was the answer, tough, reliable, unforgiving in its way. A typical household bought barley from the market, or from temple stores, or received it as payment. Then came the first step, pounding. A woman, usually a woman, would place the grain in a stone mortar. The pestle rose and fell for hours. No machines, no shortcuts, just muscle and repetition. The pounding broke the hull. It loosened the grain. What remained was coarse meal. This meal was mixed with water and salt. Salt was expensive, so not much, and sometimes with a small amount of fat if the household could afford it. Fat made the dough less dense, made it rise better, but most households couldn't afford fat. The dough was left to ferment overnight, not because anyone understood yeast. They didn't. Wild yeast from the air, from the grain itself, from the tools and vessels, it colonized the dough naturally. By morning, the dough had risen. It had developed flavor. It was ready to bake. Here's where the baker's law came in. The dough, once prepared at home, was brought to a communal oven. Nearly every household didn't have its own oven. Ovens were expensive, required skilled construction, and posed a fire risk. So the village baker owned the oven. The baker shaped your dough, baked it, charged a fee, usually a small portion of the bread itself. The baker's hands never left the dough because the law said so. King Hammurabi's code, written around 1754 BCE, included laws about bakers. If a baker made bread underweight, his hand was cut off. If he overcharged, he faced fines. The punishment was grotesque because the crime was seen as theft from the community itself. The oven itself was a marvel of engineering. Mud brick, shaped into a dome or beehive. A small opening at the base for fuel. Wood burned hot and fast. The baker swept out the coals once the interior reached temperature, then slid the shaped loaves onto the floor using a long wooden peel. Baking took minutes. The oven stayed hot for hours. What emerged was dense, heavy, nutritious. The loaves were round or oval, and they broke rather than sliced. Most people ate them with beer, yes, beer. Beer and bread were the two pillars of the Mesopotamian diet. Beer was often weak, safer than water, and full of calories. A laborer might eat 2 or 3 loaves a day. A wealthy person ate bread too, but could afford meat, fish, vegetables, honey, dates. The poor ate bread and beer. Bread and beer, and occasionally onions or garlic. Bread and beer, and if they were lucky, dates in season. There were variations. Bread made from wheat, if you were wealthy. Bread made with added sesame, with herbs, with more fat. The temples baked special breads for offerings. The palace had bakeries that produced bread for the king's household and for distribution to workers. But the principle remained the same: grain, water, salt, heat, time. Bread also had spiritual weight. It was broken and shared. It was an offering to gods. It was part of contracts and treaties. When a man married, bread was exchanged. When someone died, bread was left at the tomb. Bread was ordinary and sacred at once. The regulations that opened this story, they weren't arbitrary cruelty. They were a response to real problems. Bakers who skimmed dough, who watered down the mixture, who underweight the loaves. The city depended on fair bread. People depended on it. So the law came down hard. By the time Babylon fell to the Persians in 539 BCE, the system of bread production had been refined over more than 1,000 years. It was so efficient, so embedded in daily life, that the Persians kept it intact. The bakers continued their work. The ovens stayed warm. The regulations stayed in place. What we know about Mesopotamian bread comes from clay tablets, from archaeological digs, from the remains of ovens and tools. We know the regulations. We know the prices. We know the ingredients. We know that for most people in ancient Babylon, the day began and ended with bread. The baker's hands never left the dough, not because he loved the work, but because civilization depended on him, because the city had written the rules, because bread was never just bread. It was law, it was wage, it was survival, it was the thread that held society together. Subscribe to uncover the hidden systems that kept the ancient world running, the ones most historians overlook.